A single forgotten invention changed the world, yet the man who created it was buried in silence. Welcome to Shadow of Black History, the place where hidden truths, forgotten heroes, and untold stories finally come into the light. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, your city, your country, and the time there right now. We love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. And if you have not subscribed yet, take a moment to subscribe and like the channel so you never miss the powerful stories we uncover here. We truly appreciate every single one of you for being here today. And trust us when we say this, the story you are about to hear is something you do not want to miss even a single paragraph of. So relax, put away every distraction around you, settle in comfortably, and pay very close attention. Because tonight we are uncovering the story of a man whose brilliance threatened powerful people, a man whose discovery quietly changed modern technology, and a man whose name was nearly erased from history forever. Now the question is, who was he? The rain fell slowly over a small wooden workshop on the edge of a quiet town in Ohio during the year 1894. Inside that dim building, surrounded by scraps of copper wire, rusted gears, and stacks of notebooks filled with careful handwriting, a young black man leaned over a strange machine that hummed softly like a living thing. His name was Isaiah Turner, and at only 28 years old, he had already solved problems that trained engineers could not even understand. Isaiah had not attended prestigious universities. He had not studied under famous professors. In fact, many people believed he should never have been allowed to study engineering at all. Yet somehow, using only old textbooks, discarded equipment, and relentless curiosity, Isaiah had built machines that made seasoned inventors stop and stare. But the machine sitting on his workbench that rainy night was different. This one, if it worked, would change the entire world. Isaiah had grown up in a small farming community where opportunity rarely visited black families. His father had been born into slavery and carried the quiet scars of that brutal system long after emancipation. His mother worked endless hours washing clothes for wealthy households. But Isaiah was different from other children almost from the moment he could walk. At the age of 7, he had taken apart his mother's broken sewing machine, something that terrified his parents because it was the only tool that helped them earn money. Yet 3 hours later, he calmly reassembled it and somehow made it run smoother than before. Word spread quickly. Soon neighbors were bringing broken clocks, lanterns, and farm tools to the young boy who seemed to understand machines as if they were speaking to him. By the time he reached 16, Isaiah had built his first crude electrical generator using scrap metal and discarded telegraph wire. People laughed at first, until the small generator powered 5 houses on his street. Electricity during the late 1800s was still mysterious to many people. Cities were just beginning to install electric lighting, and inventors across the country were racing to control the future of power. But Isaiah noticed something that others ignored. Electricity could travel across wires, but enormous amounts of energy were lost during transmission. Power stations had to be built close to cities because electricity weakened as it moved through long cables. Isaiah believed there was a solution. For months, he studied electromagnetic fields and energy transfer late into the night. His notebooks filled with strange diagrams and calculations that no one around him fully understood. Eventually, he reached a dangerous conclusion. What if electricity could travel without wires? It sounded impossible. Yet the machine sitting in front of him that rainy evening was his attempt to prove that impossible idea was real. The device looked strange, almost alien. A tall copper coil wrapped around a wooden cylinder stood at the center of the machine. Around it were several circular metal plates connected by carefully soldered wires. At the base of the apparatus sat a small generator powered by a hand crank. Isaiah wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold rain outside. If his calculations were correct, the coil would produce an oscillating electromagnetic field strong enough to send energy through the air itself. Nearby devices could receive that energy using specially tuned receivers. In simple words, electricity would no longer need wires. Isaiah turned the hand crank slowly. The generator began to spin. A soft buzzing sound filled the room. Then the impossible happened. A small light bulb sitting on a table across the workshop flickered to life, even though it was not connected to anything. Isaiah froze. Then he whispered quietly to himself, "It works." For several seconds, Isaiah simply stared at the glowing bulb. The light danced gently in the dark workshop, powered by energy that had traveled through empty space. No wires, no cables, just invisible power moving through the air. He repeated the experiment 3 more times to make sure it was real. Each time the bulb lit perfectly. Isaiah did not realize it yet, but the discovery he had just made would one day influence technologies like wireless communication, radio transmission, and even the wireless charging used in modern devices. But the world would not celebrate him. Instead, powerful men would soon learn about his invention, and they would decide that Isaiah Turner must disappear from history. Outside the workshop, a black carriage slowly rolled down the muddy road. Inside the carriage sat 2 well-dressed men who had been watching the building for over an hour. One of them leaned forward and said quietly, "So the rumors were true." The other man nodded. "If that machine works, it will destroy the entire electrical industry." A long silence followed. Then the first man spoke again. "Which means Mr. Turner cannot be allowed to succeed." Inside the workshop, Isaiah continued writing excited notes about his experiment, completely unaware that his greatest discovery had just placed him in terrible danger. And this was only the beginning. Because what happened next would not only threaten Isaiah's life, it would expose one of the most shocking acts of scientific theft in American history. But that part of the story begins on a cold winter morning in the year 1895. And when Isaiah Turner woke up that morning, he had no idea that by sunset, powerful men would already be planning how to steal his invention and erase his name forever. The morning that changed Isaiah Turner's life forever arrived quietly. The sun rose slowly over the small Ohio town during the year 1895, spreading pale light across frozen fields and narrow dirt roads. Inside his workshop, Isaiah had not slept for more than 2 hours. His mind was racing with possibilities after the experiment from the previous night. The glowing bulb without wires had not been an accident. He had repeated the test again and again until exhaustion forced him to stop. Each attempt proved the same incredible truth. Energy could move through the air itself. He walked across the room and stared again at the notebook filled with his calculations. Every page carried careful handwriting, sketches of coils and receivers, and long columns of equations. He understood something that the world had not yet realized. If electricity could travel through space without wires, entire cities could be powered without miles of cables. Ships at sea could receive power from the shore. Machines could communicate across great distances. The future of energy would change forever. But Isaiah also understood another truth that weighed heavily on his mind. Inventions like this attracted attention, and attention often brought danger. The quiet town of Cedar Ridge was not used to visitors in fine clothes. Most people who traveled through the area were farmers, merchants, or railroad workers. So when a polished black carriage rolled into town later that afternoon, nearly everyone noticed. The carriage stopped in front of Isaiah's workshop. 2 men stepped out slowly. Their coats were expensive. Their shoes shined even in the winter dust. The taller of the 2 men carried a leather briefcase and moved with the calm confidence of someone who believed the world belonged to him. Inside the workshop, Isaiah was adjusting the copper coil when he heard the knock. 3 slow taps. He opened the door cautiously. The taller man smiled politely and said, "Mr. Isaiah Turner, we have traveled quite a distance to meet you." Isaiah studied the 2 strangers carefully and asked, "And who exactly are you?" The shorter man stepped forward and answered smoothly, "My name is Charles Whitaker, and this is my associate, Mr. Henry Caldwell. We represent a group of investors who are very interested in your work." Isaiah felt a chill move through him and replied, "How do you know about my work?" Whitaker's smile widened slightly as he said, "Mr. Turner, men with vision rarely remain unnoticed for long." Isaiah hesitated before allowing them inside. The moment Whitaker stepped into the workshop, his eyes began studying everything around him. He looked at the copper coils, the generator, and the stacks of notebooks. His expression remained calm, but inside his mind, calculations were already forming. Caldwell walked slowly around the strange machine in the center of the room and murmured quietly, "Remarkable." Isaiah crossed his arms and said, "You still have not explained why you are here." Whitaker opened his briefcase and removed a folded document. "Because we believe you have built something extraordinary," he said, "something that could change the future of electricity." Isaiah's voice grew colder. "That depends on who is asking." Whitaker placed the document carefully on the workbench and continued speaking. "Our associates represent some of the most powerful electrical companies in the country, men who control power stations in cities from Chicago to New York." Isaiah felt his stomach tighten as Whitaker continued. "They believe your invention deserves proper development, funding, laboratories, skilled engineers." Isaiah stared at the document without touching it and asked quietly, "And what exactly do they want in return?" Whitaker finally spoke the words Isaiah had been expecting. "Your patent rights." For a long moment, the workshop remained silent. Outside, the wind rattled the wooden walls of the building. Isaiah walked slowly toward the workbench and picked up the document. His eyes moved across the page. The language was formal and precise, with legal terms filling every paragraph, but the meaning was clear. If he signed the document, ownership of his invention would belong entirely to Whitaker's investors. Isaiah looked up again and asked, "How much?" Whitaker answered immediately, $10,000. The number hung in the air. For a man like Isaiah, the amount was enormous. His parents had worked their entire lives without ever seeing even a fraction of that money. $10,000 could buy land, equipment, and security for his family for decades. Whitaker watched Isaiah carefully and added quietly, "You could live very comfortably." Isaiah placed the document back on the table and asked, "And after I sell it?" Whitaker smiled again. "Our engineers will continue developing the technology." Isaiah leaned closer and asked one final question. "And my name?" Whitaker's expression did not change. "The company would handle the patents and public presentation." Isaiah understood exactly what that meant. His invention would exist, but his name would disappear. Isaiah walked slowly across the workshop and looked at the small wireless bulb that had started everything. For years he had struggled to learn, to experiment, and to build something meaningful. Every piece of copper wire in the room had been purchased with money earned repairing broken tools for farmers. Every page of calculations represented nights of sacrifice. Whitaker's offer would erase all of that. Isaiah turned back toward the two men and spoke quietly. "Gentlemen, I did not build this invention just to sell it." Whitaker's smile faded slightly as he replied, "You may want to reconsider." Isaiah shook his head. "My answer is no." Caldwell finally spoke for the first time since entering the workshop. "You should think carefully about the opportunity you are refusing." Isaiah's voice became firm. "I already have." Whitaker slowly closed his briefcase and said, "That is unfortunate." Isaiah frowned and asked, "Why?" Whitaker looked directly into Isaiah's eyes and said calmly, "Because, Mr. Turner, our investors are not accustomed to hearing that word." The two men left the workshop without another argument. Their carriage rolled slowly back down the road toward the train station. Inside the carriage, Caldwell looked toward Whitaker and said, "That could have gone better." Whitaker did not seem concerned. "He will reconsider." Caldwell shook his head. "You saw his face. That man will never sell." Whitaker stared out the window at the darkening sky and replied calmly, "Perhaps not willingly." Caldwell understood immediately. "You are suggesting we take the design." Whitaker spoke quietly. "Our employers cannot allow such a technology to remain uncontrolled. If Turner refuses cooperation, we will simply proceed without him." Caldwell frowned and asked, "And if he resists?" Whitaker turned slowly and answered, "History is full of inventors who were never properly credited." Meanwhile, back in the workshop, Isaiah felt uneasy. The conversation had ended politely. Yet something about Whitaker's calm confidence troubled him deeply. He returned to his workbench and opened his notebook again. For the next several hours, he worked quietly, but he did not notice the figure standing in the darkness outside the workshop window. Someone had remained behind, watching, listening, learning. Before the week ended, Isaiah Turner would discover that refusing Whitaker's offer had placed him in the center of a conspiracy far larger than he ever imagined. A conspiracy involving powerful corporations, stolen patents, and a plan to claim his invention as someone else's greatest achievement. And once that plan began moving forward, stopping it would become nearly impossible. Understood. Going forward, I will keep the story tightly packed with no unnecessary line gaps, while still maintaining clear chapters and 4 paragraphs per chapter as you required. Here is the rewritten part 3 in the correct flowing format. 3 nights after the visit from Whitaker and Caldwell, the town of Cedar Ridge rested under a deep winter silence. Snow had begun falling shortly after sunset during the year 1895, covering rooftops, fences, and the narrow dirt roads that cut through the farmland. Isaiah Turner walked slowly toward his workshop carrying a small lantern whose weak flame struggled against the cold wind. He had spent the evening at his parents' home sharing a quiet meal, yet his mind had not rested for a moment. The strange visitors who had offered to buy his invention kept returning to his thoughts. The calm confidence in Whitaker's voice did not sound like the voice of a man who accepted rejection easily. Isaiah had learned through experience that powerful men rarely abandon opportunities that promised enormous profit. As he approached the workshop door, he noticed something unusual illuminated by the lantern light. Several boot prints lay pressed into the fresh snow near the entrance. They had not been there earlier that day. Isaiah stopped walking immediately and studied the ground more carefully. The wind blew softly across the field, slowly filling the edges of the prints with drifting snow. Isaiah felt a quiet tension building in his chest as he stepped closer to the door. At first, the wooden frame looked perfectly normal, but when he placed his hand against the handle, the door shifted strangely on its hinges. Someone had forced it open. Isaiah pushed the door slowly, and the lantern light revealed a sight that caused his heart to sink. The workshop had been completely ransacked. Drawers had been pulled from cabinets and dumped across the floor. Tools were scattered everywhere. Sheets of paper lay crumpled between broken wooden boxes. It was clear that whoever had entered had not come for random theft. They had searched for something very specific. Isaiah walked quickly toward the workbench where his research materials were normally kept. His eyes moved instantly toward the wooden stack where several thick notebooks had always rested. The space was empty. For a moment, he simply stood there, unable to move. Those notebooks contained years of experiments, calculations, diagrams, and observations about wireless electrical transmission. Every improvement he had made to the design existed within those pages. Anyone who possessed them would gain access to the knowledge that had taken Isaiah nearly a decade to develop. He began searching the room desperately, lifting tools and pushing aside debris as if the notebooks might somehow appear beneath the scattered clutter. Minutes passed before he finally stopped. The truth was now impossible to ignore. The notebooks were gone. Someone had broken into his workshop and stolen the heart of his invention. Isaiah slowly straightened his back and tried to calm his breathing. Anger mixed with disbelief inside his mind. Only a few people even knew that the notebooks existed. His parents had occasionally seen them, but never touched his work. A handful of farmers in the area knew he experimented with electricity, yet none of them could understand the complex calculations written inside the pages. The theft had not been random. Whoever entered the workshop understood exactly what they were looking for. His thoughts returned immediately to the visitors from several nights earlier. Whitaker and Caldwell had walked through the workshop, carefully examining every detail. They had studied the notebooks closely while standing beside the machine that powered the wireless bulb. At the time, Isaiah had believed they were simply curious investors evaluating a potential purchase. Now he realized they had been gathering information. Isaiah walked outside again and lifted the lantern toward the snow-covered ground. The boot prints continued away from the workshop toward the narrow road leading to the railway station. At least 2 people had been involved, possibly more. The snow had already begun softening the edges of the tracks, but their direction was still clear. He followed them slowly across the frozen field. The trail eventually reached the dirt road where wagon wheels had crushed the snow into thick, muddy ruts. The footprints vanished there, hidden beneath the heavy grooves left by passing carriages. Whoever had stolen the notebooks had likely left town quickly. Isaiah stood quietly beside the road while the wind moved across the open land. A troubling thought began forming in his mind. If Whitaker had ordered the theft, the notebooks might already be on their way to a major industrial city. Chicago, Philadelphia, or New York, where powerful electrical laboratories operated day and night searching for new inventions. The idea made his stomach tighten. Years of work could soon appear in another man's laboratory under another man's name. Isaiah turned back toward the direction of town. There was still a small chance he could learn something about the theft before the trail disappeared completely. The Cedar Ridge Telegraph office operated late into the night because trains often arrived after dark. Messages sent through that office could reveal whether Whitaker had already contacted someone about the stolen research. The small telegraph station stood near the railway tracks where a dim yellow lamp glowed above the entrance. When Isaiah stepped inside, he found the operator seated at his desk, listening to the quiet clicking of the telegraph receiver. The operator looked up with mild surprise when Isaiah entered. "Evening, Isaiah," he said. "Cold night to be out walking." Isaiah nodded politely and stepped closer to the desk. "I needed to ask you something," he said carefully. The operator leaned back slightly and folded his hands. "What can I help you with?" Isaiah chose his words cautiously because he did not want to reveal too much too quickly. "Have any unusual telegrams been sent from here recently? Perhaps messages addressed to electrical companies or laboratories in larger cities?" The operator raised an eyebrow at the strange question. "That is a very specific thing to ask," he replied. Isaiah remained calm. "I believe someone may be discussing some work of mine without permission." The operator scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Now that you mention it, 2 gentlemen did stop by here 2 nights ago after arriving on the evening train. They were in quite a hurry and asked me to send a telegram immediately." Isaiah felt tension move through his chest. "Do you remember what the message said?" The operator nodded slowly. "I remember parts of it because the wording seemed unusual. Something about a successful acquisition and urgent analysis required." Isaiah's suspicion hardened into certainty. Whitaker had not only stolen the notebooks, he had already sent word to someone waiting for them. Isaiah asked one more question. "Did the message mention a name?" The operator nodded again. "Yes, it was addressed to a laboratory in New York, and the message included the name Edison." Isaiah felt the world shift slightly beneath his feet. The name was famous across the entire country. Thomas Edison stood at the center of American electrical innovation. His laboratories produced inventions that newspapers celebrated constantly. Wealthy investors trusted him with enormous resources because anything connected to Edison seemed destined for success. Isaiah struggled to keep his voice steady. "You are certain about that name?" The operator shrugged casually. "I copy hundreds of messages each month, but that one stood out. The men seemed very excited when they sent it." Isaiah thanked the operator quietly and stepped outside into the falling snow. His stolen notebooks had been sent to the laboratory of the most powerful inventor in America. Isaiah walked slowly back toward his workshop while the snow continued drifting down from the dark sky. The situation was far more dangerous than he had imagined. Challenging wealthy investors was difficult enough, but confronting the scientific empire surrounding Thomas Edison would be another matter entirely. Powerful lawyers protected his patents. Newspapers praised his discoveries. Investors defended his reputation fiercely. Yet Isaiah also understood something important. The notebooks alone were not enough. The wireless energy system required deep understanding of the equations behind it. Without that knowledge, another engineer might struggle to reproduce the results, even with the research notes. As Isaiah stepped inside the damaged workshop, he noticed something he had overlooked earlier. On a small shelf near the back wall rested a thin notebook that the thieves had ignored. It was not part of the main research journals. It was an early diary he had kept years earlier while exploring the first ideas about wireless electricity. Inside those pages were dated entries describing the earliest concept sketches and rough calculations that eventually led to the working machine. Isaiah picked up the diary carefully. This small, forgotten book might be the only remaining proof that the invention belonged to him. And if he wanted justice, he would have to take that proof directly to the place where his stolen work had been sent. New York. To the laboratory of Thomas Edison. What Isaiah did not yet realize was that powerful men were already preparing for his arrival. They had a plan designed to do more than steal his invention. They intended to destroy his credibility so completely that no one would ever believe he had created the technology in the first place. And by the time Isaiah Turner stepped off the train in New York, the fight to reclaim his discovery would become far more dangerous than he ever imagined. The train to New York left Cedar Ridge before sunrise during the year 1895. Isaiah Turner sat quietly beside the window while frost covered the glass and the countryside slid slowly past in pale morning light. Snow blanketed the fields, fences, and distant farmhouses, creating a silent landscape that seemed far removed from the storm building in his life. In his coat pocket rested the small diary he had recovered from the workshop shelf, the only surviving record proving that the idea for wireless electrical transmission belonged to him. Every few minutes, Isaiah touched the pocket to make sure the notebook was still there. The rhythmic movement of the train wheels echoed beneath the wooden floor as if counting down the distance between him and the city where his stolen research had been sent. The journey lasted most of the day. As the train moved east, the quiet farmlands slowly gave way to crowded towns, tall factories, and endless lines of telegraph wires stretching beside the tracks. Isaiah watched the wires carefully. Those long cables carried electricity and communication across great distances. Yet he knew they also represented a limitation. If his invention succeeded, the world would no longer depend on endless miles of copper lines. Power could move invisibly through the air itself. That idea alone was enough to threaten industries worth millions of dollars. By late afternoon, the train began slowing as it approached the outskirts of New York. Smoke rose from factory chimneys and filled the sky with a gray haze. The city stretched outward in every direction, alive with noise and movement. Wagons rattled along crowded streets. Steam whistles echoed from the harbor. Electric lamps glowed along major avenues even before the sun had fully set. Isaiah stepped off the train, carrying only a small bag and the weight of a dangerous mission. Somewhere inside this enormous city, men were studying his stolen invention. New York in the 1890s was a place where ambition and power collided every day. Inventors, businessmen, and investors flooded the city searching for the next discovery that could transform industry. Laboratories operated behind brick walls filled with complicated machines. Newspapers eagerly reported every new technological breakthrough. Yet beneath that excitement existed a fierce battle for control over the future of electricity. Isaiah walked through the busy streets, carefully observing everything around him. Electric street lamps lined many of the main roads, their light reflecting off wet cobblestones left behind by melting snow. Each glowing lamp reminded him of the competition that dominated the electrical industry. Powerful companies fought constantly over which systems would power the cities of the future. The laboratory he needed to find belonged to Thomas Edison, a name recognized across the entire country. His research facilities attracted talented engineers, skilled machinists, and wealthy investors who believed his inventions would shape modern life. For Isaiah, the challenge was simple yet dangerous. He needed to enter the world of that laboratory without revealing why he had come. Finding the facility was not difficult. Edison's operations had grown so large that many people in the city already knew where they were located. By nightfall, Isaiah stood on a quiet street facing a group of brick buildings surrounded by iron fencing. Dim lights glowed through tall windows where shadows moved across the walls. His stolen research might already be inside. Isaiah waited across the street, watching the building carefully. Several workers eventually left through the main entrance, carrying toolboxes and heavy coats against the cold air. Their tired expressions suggested long hours spent inside the laboratory. As the evening grew darker, the number of people entering and leaving slowly decreased. Finally, the street became quiet. Isaiah walked slowly along the iron fence, studying the structure. The laboratory complex included several connected buildings filled with workshops, testing rooms, and offices. Behind the main structure stood a smaller warehouse with a wide wooden door used for delivering equipment and supplies. The door was secured by a heavy lock, but the fence beside the warehouse had a narrow opening where the metal bars had been bent slightly outward. Someone had forced that gap long ago. Isaiah slipped through carefully and moved toward the shadow of the warehouse wall. His heart pounded as he approached the door. The lock appeared strong, yet the wood surrounding it had been weakened by years of weather. After several minutes of careful pressure, the door shifted slightly. The hinges creaked softly as he opened it just wide enough to slip inside. The interior smelled of oil, metal, and machine grease. Isaiah lifted a small lantern he had purchased earlier and slowly explored the dark room. The warehouse contained shelves stacked with electrical components. Coils of copper wire hung from wooden racks. Metal plates, gears, and mechanical parts filled large wooden crates. Isaiah moved deeper into the building until he reached a door connecting the warehouse to the main laboratory. Light shone faintly beneath the door. Voices drifted through the crack. Isaiah held his breath and listened. Several men were speaking excitedly inside the next room. Their conversation moved quickly between technical terms and frustrated complaints about calculations that refused to behave properly. Isaiah recognized the language immediately. They were discussing wireless energy transmission. His stolen research had reached the laboratory. Carefully, Isaiah pushed the door open a few inches and looked inside. The room beyond contained a large workbench surrounded by complicated equipment. Several engineers stood around a tall copper coil, nearly identical to the design he had built in Cedar Ridge. One of the men turned a crank connected to a generator, while another watched a small bulb placed several feet away. The bulb flickered briefly. Then it went dark. The engineers groaned in frustration. Isaiah listened closely as the men discussed their problem. One of them flipped through a notebook filled with copied diagrams. According to the notes, this configuration should produce a stable oscillating field, he said. Another engineer shook his head. Something is missing. The calculations do not explain how the energy maintains strength across open space. A third man leaned against the table. The instructions we received were incomplete. Whoever wrote these notes understood the system far better than we do. Isaiah felt a mixture of anger and satisfaction. They had stolen his work, but they still could not make it function. Without the deeper understanding inside his mind, the machine remained only a puzzle. Then another voice spoke from the far side of the room. It was calm, confident, and carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Gentlemen," the voice said, "scientific progress often requires patience." Isaiah leaned closer to the doorway. Standing beside the machine was a man whose face appeared frequently in newspapers. Thomas Edison himself. Edison studied the copper coil carefully while the engineers waited for his instructions. He turned slowly toward the notebook containing Isaiah's stolen diagrams. "The concept is promising," he said thoughtfully. "If we solve the remaining calculations, this system could revolutionize electrical transmission." One of the engineers asked, "Do you believe the original inventor will attempt to claim the work?" Edison closed the notebook calmly. "Mr. Whitaker assured me that the matter has been handled. By the time this device is presented publicly, the origin of the idea will be beyond question." Isaiah felt his hands tighten against the doorframe. They intended to claim his invention as Edison's next great discovery. The engineers returned to the machine and began adjusting the copper plates while Edison observed silently. For several minutes, Isaiah watched them struggle with the design he knew better than anyone. Part of him wanted to step into the room immediately and reveal the truth. Yet another part understood how dangerous that move could be. Whitaker and his investors had already proven they were willing to steal his work. Confronting them without preparation could destroy his chance to prove ownership. Isaiah slowly closed the door and stepped back into the dark warehouse. The battle ahead would require patience and careful planning. But now he had seen the truth with his own eyes. His invention was already inside Edison's laboratory. And if he did not act quickly, the world would soon believe it belonged to someone else. The cold night air felt heavier when Isaiah stepped back onto the street outside the laboratory complex. The city lights of New York glowed across the wet pavement, while distant carriage wheels echoed between the tall brick buildings. For several moments, he simply stood there, breathing slowly, trying to calm the storm of thoughts rushing through his mind. Inside that laboratory, he had just witnessed something that confirmed his worst fear. Engineers working under the authority of Thomas Edison were attempting to rebuild the wireless energy system using the notebook stolen from his workshop in Cedar Ridge. The machine on their table looked almost identical to the one he had created months earlier. Yet they could not make it function correctly. That failure gave Isaiah a small but important advantage. They possessed his research notes, but they did not possess the deeper understanding that existed only inside his mind. He walked away from the laboratory district slowly, blending into the late evening crowd moving through the busy streets. Shop windows glowed with warm light. Street vendors called out to passing pedestrians. Electric lamps illuminated intersections where horse-drawn carriages rattled across wet cobblestones. To most people, the city felt alive with opportunity and progress. Yet Isaiah now understood that beneath this progress existed ruthless competition. Powerful industries were built on inventions, and whoever controlled those inventions controlled enormous wealth. Inside his coat pocket, the small diary pressed against his chest. It contained the earliest written record of the idea they were trying to steal. If he used it carefully, that diary could become the key to proving the truth. Isaiah found a modest boarding house not far from the train station where travelers often rented rooms for several nights at a time. The elderly woman who managed the building barely asked questions when he paid for a small room on the second floor. Once inside, Isaiah locked the door and placed the diary on the narrow wooden table beside the bed. He opened the fragile pages carefully. The entries inside had been written years earlier while he struggled to understand the strange behavior of electromagnetic fields. The handwriting was younger, less precise than the notebook stolen from his workshop, yet the ideas were clear. Dates marked each page. Early sketches showed the original concept of transmitting energy through open space using oscillating electrical currents. Isaiah flipped slowly through the pages. The earliest entry describing the wireless transmission idea was dated 3 years earlier during the year 1892. That date might become crucial. If Edison or his investors attempted to claim the invention publicly, Isaiah could present this diary as proof that he had developed the concept long before the laboratory engineers even knew it existed. But proof alone would not be enough. Powerful men could ignore inconvenient evidence if no one forced them to answer for it. Isaiah needed witnesses. The following morning, Isaiah began searching for a place where his work could be documented officially. After walking through several crowded streets, he eventually reached the United States Patent Office branch located in New York. The building stood tall and quiet compared to the noisy city surrounding it. Inside, clerks worked behind long desks examining technical drawings submitted by inventors, hoping to secure legal rights to their ideas. Isaiah approached the nearest desk and spoke politely with the clerk. "I would like to file a provisional patent record." The clerk looked up with mild interest. "Do you have documentation of the invention?" Isaiah carefully placed the diary on the desk. "This contains the earliest written record of the concept." The clerk began flipping through the pages slowly. His eyes moved across the rough diagrams and dated notes. After several minutes, he looked back at Isaiah. "These ideas appear unusual," the clerk said. "Wireless electrical transmission is not commonly discussed." Isaiah nodded quietly. "That is because most people believe it is impossible." The clerk closed the diary thoughtfully. "Well, Mr. Turner, if you wish to secure recognition for the concept, we can register this documentation as evidence of your work. It will not grant a full patent yet, but it will record that the idea existed under your name on this date." Isaiah felt a small wave of relief. That record could become powerful protection. While the clerk prepared the necessary paperwork, Isaiah remained seated near the desk, observing the quiet activity inside the office. Inventors arrived one after another carrying rolled blueprints, small mechanical models, or stacks of written calculations. Some spoke excitedly about their designs, while others looked nervous, hoping their ideas might change their lives. Isaiah thought about the difference between these hopeful inventors and the powerful laboratories already operating across the country. Independent thinkers often struggled to protect their work against wealthy companies, with lawyers and investors ready to claim ownership. When the clerk returned with the documents, Isaiah signed them carefully. The clerk then stamped the paperwork with an official seal. "There," the man said calmly, "your concept is now recorded under your name. If anyone attempts to claim the same invention later, this documentation will establish that you described it first." Isaiah thanked the clerk sincerely and left the building holding a copy of the record. For the first time since the notebooks were stolen, he felt that the truth might still survive. Later that afternoon, Isaiah returned to the laboratory district where Edison's facility stood. This time he did not sneak through the fence or hide in the shadows. Instead, he walked directly toward the front entrance. Workers moved in and out carrying equipment and tools, while the steady hum of machinery echoed from inside their buildings. Isaiah approached a young assistant standing near the door. "I would like to request a meeting with Mr. Edison," he said calmly. The assistant looked at him with mild confusion. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Isaiah replied, "but I believe he will want to hear what I have to say." The assistant hesitated before disappearing inside the building. Several minutes passed before he returned, accompanied by a tall engineer whose expression carried both curiosity and suspicion. "What business do you have with Mr. Edison?" the engineer asked. Isaiah reached into his coat and removed the patent record document. "My name is Isaiah Turner," he said clearly, "and I believe your laboratory is currently experimenting with a machine that belongs to me." The engineer studied the paper slowly, his eyebrows rising as he read the official stamp and the description of wireless electrical transmission. His expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "You should wait here," he said quietly. Several minutes later, the door opened again. This time, Thomas Edison himself stepped into the hallway. He looked directly at Isaiah with calm, analytical eyes. "So," Edison said slowly, "you are the man who claims ownership of the design my engineers are studying." Isaiah met his gaze without hesitation. "I do not claim it," Isaiah replied. "I invented it." For a moment, the hallway fell silent except for the faint humming of machinery deeper inside the building. Edison folded his hands behind his back and studied Isaiah carefully. "You understand," Edison said, "that accusations involving intellectual property are serious matters." Isaiah lifted the patent record document. "That is why I registered proof this morning." Edison looked down at the stamped paperwork and then back at Isaiah. For the first time, his calm expression showed the smallest sign of concern, because now the situation had changed. Isaiah Turner was no longer an unknown inventor from a small Ohio town. He was a man with documented evidence. And if the truth reached the public, one of the most famous inventors in the world could face the greatest scandal of his career. What neither of them realized in that moment was that Whitaker and the investors behind him were already preparing their next move. And that move would turn this battle for an invention into something far more dangerous. Because powerful men rarely protect their reputations with honesty. Sometimes they protect them with silence. And sometimes they protect them by making their problems disappear. The hallway inside Edison's laboratory remained silent for several seconds after Isaiah Turner finished speaking. Workers moving through nearby rooms could still be heard adjusting equipment and carrying tools. Yet the small space where Isaiah stood with Thomas Edison felt suddenly heavy with tension. Edison studied the document in Isaiah's hand again before returning his attention to the young inventor's face. His expression remained calm, yet the careful way he measured every word suggested that his mind was working quickly. The presence of an official patent record complicated matters more than Whitaker had promised. If Isaiah's claim gained attention, the laboratory could face serious questions about the origin of the wireless transmission device. Edison finally gestured toward a nearby office. "Come inside," he said quietly. Isaiah followed him into the room where several large drafting tables were covered with electrical diagrams. Shelves along the walls held books, coils of copper wire, and mechanical parts used for experimental machines. Edison closed the door behind them and walked toward the desk at the center of the office. "Mr. Turner," he said calmly, "I believe we should discuss this situation carefully." Isaiah remained standing. "That is exactly why I came." Edison sat behind the desk and placed his hands together thoughtfully. "You claim that the wireless transmission concept belongs to you," he said. "Yet the materials my laboratory received came through private investors who assured us they held legal rights to the design." Isaiah shook his head slowly. "Those investors stole my research notebooks from my workshop in Cedar Ridge. The diagrams your engineers are studying were taken without my permission." Edison listened without interruption. "The notebooks alone do not prove anything," Isaiah continued, "but the diary I presented to the patent office contains the earliest record of the idea. It was written 3 years ago, during the year 1892. Edison leaned back slightly in his chair. You must understand the position this places me in, he said. My laboratory operates on trust with investors who fund our experiments. If they provided stolen material without my knowledge, that would be extremely unfortunate. Isaiah studied him carefully. Unfortunate for whom? Edison did not answer immediately. The older inventor stood and walked slowly toward the window overlooking the street. Carriages rolled past beneath the electric lamps outside, while snow continued drifting lightly through the evening air. Scientific progress is rarely simple, Edison said after a moment. Many discoveries appear in multiple places at nearly the same time. Independent minds sometimes arrive at similar conclusions. Isaiah recognized the direction of the conversation. You are suggesting that your engineers might have developed the idea independently. I am suggesting that inventions often have complicated origins. Isaiah stepped closer to the desk and placed the patent record document on the surface. This origin is not complicated, he said firmly. Your investors attempted to buy the invention from me. When I refused, they broke into my workshop and stole my research. Edison turned from the window. And you can prove that? Isaiah did not hesitate. Yes. Edison's eyes narrowed slightly. Proof is a powerful thing, Mr. Turner, he said. But powerful men also possess many ways to challenge it. He walked back to the desk and studied the patent record again. Even if your claim is accurate, public disputes involving experimental technology can become messy. Newspapers exaggerate details. Lawyers argue endlessly about small technicalities. Isaiah understood the meaning behind those words. Edison was warning him. Not openly, but clearly enough. If you believe silence will protect your laboratory, Isaiah replied calmly, you are mistaken. Edison looked at him with quiet interest. And what exactly do you intend to do? Isaiah answered without hesitation. I intend to present the evidence publicly before anyone else claims the invention. The room grew silent again. Edison's calm expression returned, yet his eyes revealed something sharper now. Calculation. You are an ambitious man, Edison said slowly, but ambition can place people in dangerous positions. Investors who support my laboratory are not accustomed to having their reputations challenged. Isaiah met his gaze. They should have considered that before stealing my work. Edison folded the patent document carefully and handed it back. I will speak with the investors who delivered these materials. If there has been a misunderstanding, perhaps a reasonable agreement can still be reached. Isaiah did not move. I am not interested in selling my invention anymore. Edison's expression remained neutral. Then what exactly do you want? Isaiah's answer came immediately. My name attached to the discovery. Edison studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. That may prove more complicated than you imagine. Isaiah left the laboratory building shortly afterward. The cold evening air struck his face as he stepped onto the street. Yet his thoughts remained focused on the conversation that had just taken place. Edison had not denied the possibility that the research was stolen, but he had also not offered any real solution. Instead, he had hinted at something else. Influence. Investors, lawyers, and powerful connections could reshape the truth before the public ever heard it. As Isaiah walked away from the laboratory district, he noticed a dark carriage waiting across the street. The driver sat motionless, holding the reins, while a figure inside the carriage watched the entrance of Edison's building carefully. When Isaiah passed beneath the street lamp, the figure inside the carriage leaned forward. Isaiah recognized the face immediately. Charles Whitaker. The investor stepped out of the carriage slowly and adjusted his coat. I had a feeling you would come here, Whitaker said calmly. Isaiah stopped walking. You already know why I am here. Whitaker smiled slightly. Yes, he said, and that is exactly why we should talk. Snow drifted softly between them while the electric lamps glowed above the quiet street. Whitaker placed his hands behind his back and spoke again. Mr. Turner, the situation has become far more complicated than it needed to be, but there is still an opportunity to resolve everything peacefully. Isaiah looked at him carefully. And how do you suggest we do that? Whitaker's smile widened just slightly. By accepting the offer you should have taken the first time. Isaiah already knew his answer. But Whitaker had not finished speaking. Because if you refuse again, the investor added quietly, the consequences will not be limited to stolen notebooks. Isaiah felt a cold weight settle in his chest. Whitaker leaned closer. Powerful men do not lose fortunes over stubborn inventors. And in that moment, Isaiah realized that the battle for his invention had just crossed into something far more dangerous than scientific rivalry. It had become a fight for survival. The cold wind moved through the narrow street as Isaiah Turner faced Charles Whitaker beneath the pale glow of the electric lamps. Snow drifted slowly between them, collecting along the edges of the cobblestone road. For several moments, neither man spoke. Carriages passed occasionally in the distance, their wheels echoing faintly through the quiet evening. Whitaker's expression remained calm and controlled, the same unsettling confidence he had displayed the first night he visited Isaiah's workshop in Cedar Ridge. It was the expression of a man who believed that every situation could eventually be controlled through pressure, money, or influence. Isaiah studied him carefully. "You already stole my work," Isaiah said quietly. "What more do you believe you can take from me?" Whitaker did not appear offended. "Inventions are only valuable when the world believes in them," he replied, "and belief is something powerful men can shape." Isaiah felt anger rising inside him, yet he forced himself to remain calm. Losing control now would only strengthen Whitaker's position. "The truth does not belong to powerful men," Isaiah said. Whitaker gave a small smile. "Perhaps not," he said, "but the public usually listens to them first." Whitaker gestured toward the carriage waiting beside the street. "Walk with me for a moment," he said. Isaiah hesitated briefly before stepping closer. The carriage driver remained silent as the two men stood beside the vehicle. Whitaker lowered his voice slightly. "You are an intelligent man, Mr. Turner. You must understand that what you created has enormous potential. Wireless transmission of electricity would reshape entire industries. Investors would gain fortunes from it. Cities would depend on it." Isaiah remained silent. Whitaker continued speaking calmly. "Men like Mr. Edison already possess the laboratories, engineers, and financial support needed to develop such technology quickly. A lone inventor from a small town does not." Isaiah looked directly at him. "That does not give you the right to steal it." Whitaker shrugged slightly. "History rarely remembers the difference." Whitaker reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded document. "This is a new agreement," he said, "much more generous than the previous offer." Isaiah did not reach for it. "How generous?" Whitaker unfolded the paper slowly. $50,000. The number hung heavily in the cold air. For a moment, Isaiah felt the weight of that amount. $50,000 could transform his entire life. His parents would never need to work again. He could build laboratories of his own and continue experimenting without financial struggle. Whitaker watched his reaction carefully. "You would live comfortably for the rest of your life," Whitaker said quietly, "and the invention would still be developed by people capable of bringing it to the world." Isaiah finally spoke. "And my name?" Whitaker folded the document again. "That part remains unchanged." Chapter 3. Isaiah looked at the snow gathering along the street before answering. "All you are offering me is silence." Whitaker's voice remained calm. "I am offering you security." Isaiah shook his head slowly. "You are offering me a chance to disappear." Whitaker sighed softly as if disappointed. "You are making this more difficult than necessary." Isaiah met his gaze again. "No, you made it difficult when you broke into my workshop." Whitaker's expression hardened slightly for the first time. "You should be careful with accusations you cannot prove." Isaiah lifted the patent record document, still folded inside his coat. "I already have proof that the invention belongs to me." Whitaker studied the coat pocket where the paper rested. "And do you believe that single piece of paper will protect you?" Whitaker stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Isaiah could hear. "Let me explain something you may not yet understand," he said quietly. "Investors who support laboratories like Edison's control newspapers, factories, and legal systems. If they choose to challenge your claim, they will not simply argue with you in public. Isaiah felt a cold tension forming in his chest. What are you saying? Whitaker's eyes remained calm. I am saying that difficult situations sometimes resolve themselves in unexpected ways. Isaiah understood the meaning. It was not just a warning. It was a threat. Whitaker stepped back toward the carriage and placed one foot on the metal step. This is your final opportunity to accept the agreement, he said. After tonight, the offer disappears. Isaiah answered without hesitation. My answer has not changed. Whitaker remained silent for a moment before climbing fully into the carriage. The driver tightened the reins as the investor leaned toward the open door. You are a brave man, Mr. Turner, Whitaker said calmly, but bravery does not always end well. The carriage began moving slowly down the street before Whitaker spoke one final time. If you value your future, you should leave New York soon. Isaiah watched the carriage disappear into the snowy darkness. For several minutes he stood beneath the street lamp, thinking carefully about everything Whitaker had said. The threat had been delivered politely, yet its meaning was clear. Powerful men did not intend to let him challenge their claim without consequences. Isaiah turned and began walking back toward the boarding house where he was staying. The cold wind cut through his coat as the city noise faded behind him. When he reached the corner near the boarding house entrance, he suddenly noticed something unusual. Two men stood quietly across the street watching the building. They were not speaking. They were not moving. And when Isaiah stepped beneath the light, their attention shifted immediately toward him. Whitaker had already begun keeping watch. Isaiah walked inside the boarding house calmly, yet the moment the door closed behind him, he understood the truth. The fight for his invention had now become a race against time. If he did not reveal the truth to the public soon, the powerful men behind Whitaker might ensure that no one ever heard his story at all. And what Isaiah did not yet realize was that those same men were already preparing their next move. Because the easiest way to silence an inventor was not to defeat him. Sometimes the easiest way was to make him disappear before anyone believed him. Isaiah Turner did not sleep that night. Inside the small boarding house room, he sat beside the narrow wooden table while the faint glow of the oil lamp flickered across the walls. Outside the window, the streets of New York slowly quieted as midnight passed. Yet Isaiah's mind refused to rest. Whitaker's warning echoed repeatedly in his thoughts. Powerful men did not lose fortunes over stubborn inventors. That sentence carried a meaning far deeper than a simple threat. It meant that the investors behind Whitaker were prepared to protect their claim to the wireless transmission invention by whatever means necessary. Isaiah opened the diary again and studied the earliest pages carefully. The rough sketches and dated entries still looked fragile beneath the lamplight, yet those pages now represented something far greater than old ideas. They were evidence. Proof that the concept existed years before Whitaker or Edison's laboratory ever saw it. The patent office record he filed earlier that day strengthened that proof. But Isaiah understood something important. Legal documents move slowly through government systems. Powerful investors could challenge them, delay them, or bury them beneath endless arguments. What he needed now was something different. Public attention. If the world learned about his invention before Edison's laboratory could claim it, the truth would become far harder to erase. Isaiah closed the diary carefully and placed it back inside his coat pocket. By morning, he would begin telling his story. At sunrise, Isaiah stepped outside the boarding house and immediately noticed the same two men standing across the street. They pretended to study the newspaper posted on a nearby wall, yet their eyes followed him as he began walking down the road. Whitaker had not wasted any time placing watchers near him. The message was clear. Every movement he made would be observed. Isaiah continued walking without acknowledging them. The city was already busy with morning activity. Street vendors arranged their carts along the sidewalks while factory workers hurried toward their shifts. The air smelled of coal smoke drifting from countless chimneys. Isaiah moved through the crowd until he reached a large brick building whose sign read, New York Evening Chronicle. Newspapers held enormous influence in the city. Reporters constantly searched for stories about scientific breakthroughs, business scandals, and technological progress. If Isaiah could convince one journalist to listen, the truth might finally reach the public. He stepped through the front door and approached the reception desk. "I would like to speak with a reporter," he said calmly. The clerk behind the desk looked up with mild curiosity. "What kind of story are you bringing?" the man asked. Isaiah answered carefully. "A story about an invention that powerful investors are trying to steal." The clerk raised an eyebrow, but eventually pointed toward a staircase leading to the second floor. "You can speak with Mr. Daniel Harper," he said. "He covers technology and industry." Isaiah climbed the stairs slowly. Inside the newsroom, dozens of desks filled a large open space. Reporters hurried between typewriters while editors shouted instructions across the room. The atmosphere buzzed with energy as newspapers prepared the next edition. Isaiah approached a desk where a man with rolled-up sleeves studied several pages of notes. "Mr. Harper?" Isaiah asked. The reporter looked up briefly. "That depends on who is asking." "My name is Isaiah Turner," he said, "and I believe you may be interested in a story involving Thomas Edison's laboratory." The reporter's attention sharpened immediately. "Sit down," Harper said. Isaiah explained everything. He described the wireless transmission machine built in Cedar Ridge, the visit from Whitaker and Caldwell, the refusal to sell his patent rights, and the break-in that resulted in the theft of his research notebooks. Harper listened carefully while occasionally writing notes on a sheet of paper. When Isaiah finally finished speaking, he removed the diary from his coat and placed it on the desk. "These entries were written 3 years ago," Isaiah said, "and yesterday I registered the concept at the patent office." Harper flipped through the pages slowly. His expression shifted from curiosity to fascination. "If what you are saying is true," the reporter said quietly, "this could become one of the largest scientific scandals in years." Isaiah nodded. "That is why I came here." Harper leaned back in his chair and looked across the busy newsroom. "The public worships Edison," he said. "Exposing something like this would be explosive." Harper closed the diary carefully. "But accusations alone are not enough," he continued. "If we publish this story, the newspaper will demand strong evidence." Isaiah reached into his coat and produced the stamped patent office document. "This was recorded yesterday morning." Harper examined the official seal. "That helps," he said slowly, "but we would still need confirmation that Edison's laboratory is actually working on the device." Isaiah answered immediately. "I saw it myself." Harper looked up sharply. "You entered the laboratory?" "Yes." The reporter let out a slow breath. "That makes the story even more interesting." Harper stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the street below. After several moments, he turned back toward Isaiah. "If we publish this tomorrow morning, the entire city will read it before noon," he said. "Investors and laboratory officials will scramble to respond. They will either deny everything or attempt to discredit you." Isaiah remained calm. "I expected that." Harper nodded slowly. "Very well. Leave the diary and the patent document with me tonight so our editors can examine them." Isaiah hesitated briefly before placing both items on the desk. Those documents represented his last remaining proof. Yet without public attention, they might never matter. Harper offered a reassuring nod. "If your story is true, Mr. Turner, the world deserves to hear it." Isaiah thanked him quietly and left the newsroom. As he stepped back onto the busy street, he did not notice the man standing across the road near the corner. The man had been watching the newspaper building carefully. And when Isaiah walked away from the entrance, the man turned quickly and hurried down the block toward a waiting carriage. Inside that carriage sat Charles Whitaker. The watcher leaned through the open door and spoke quickly. "Sir, he has just given documents to the newspaper." Whitaker's calm expression finally changed, because now the situation had become dangerous. If the Chronicle printed Isaiah Turner's story, the truth about the stolen invention could reach thousands of readers by morning. Whitaker leaned back inside the carriage and gave a quiet order to the driver. "We do not have until morning," he said. And for the first time since the notebooks were stolen, the men who tried to erase Isaiah Turner from history realized that they might be running out of time. But what they decided to do next would place Isaiah in more danger than he had faced yet. Because powerful men did not always fight the scandals with words. Sometimes they tried to stop the story before it could be printed. The printing presses of the New York Evening Chronicle roared to life shortly before sunrise. Inside the large brick building, the machines thundered as thousands of newspapers rolled through heavy metal cylinders and emerged covered in fresh ink. Workers stacked the printed pages quickly, while delivery boys waited beside wooden carts ready to carry the morning edition across the city. The newsroom upstairs had worked through most of the night preparing the story that Daniel Harper believed could shake the foundations of the electrical industry. Across the front page ran a bold headline: "A forgotten inventor challenges the greatest laboratory in America." The article described Isaiah Turner's discovery of wireless electrical transmission, the theft of his research notebooks, and the evidence recorded at the patent office proving that the idea had existed under his name years before the laboratory engineers began studying it. Harper had written carefully but confidently, presenting the diary entries and official records as powerful documentation. By the time the first light of morning touched the streets of New York, the story had already begun spreading. Delivery carts rolled through crowded neighborhoods while newspaper sellers shouted headlines at busy intersections. Workers on their way to factories stopped to read the article. Businessmen opened the paper during breakfast and stared at the shocking claims printed across the front page. Within a few hours, the name Isaiah Turner was being spoken across the city. And inside Edison's laboratory, the reaction was immediate. Thomas Edison sat at his desk holding the newspaper, while several senior engineers stood nearby in tense silence. The headline spread across the front page made the situation impossible to ignore. Investors had promised that the wireless transmission design arrived with no complications, yet now the entire city was reading about an inventor who claimed the technology had been stolen from him. One of the engineers finally spoke. "Mr. Edison, reporters are already gathering outside the building." Edison folded the newspaper slowly. "This article will cause unnecessary confusion," he said calmly, "but confusion can be corrected." Another engineer glanced at the machine resting in the laboratory room beyond the office door. "The device still does not function properly," he admitted. "Without the missing calculations, we cannot stabilize the field." Edison looked toward the machine thoughtfully. "Which means Mr. Turner may still hold the key to making it work." The engineers exchanged uneasy glances, because that realization changed everything. Across the city, Isaiah Turner stood near a street corner reading the same newspaper that had begun spreading his story. Crowds moved around him while vendors shouted the headlines again and again. Several people stopped to discuss the article with surprise and curiosity. Isaiah finished reading slowly. For the first time since the notebooks were stolen, he felt a quiet sense of relief. The truth was no longer hidden inside a small diary or a patent office record. It now existed in thousands of printed copies traveling through the streets of the largest city in the country. Even if powerful investors attempted to deny the accusations, the story could no longer disappear quietly. Isaiah folded the newspaper and looked down the street. At the far end, several reporters were already gathering near Edison's laboratory entrance. The confrontation he had expected was about to begin. Later that afternoon, a formal statement was released from Edison's laboratory inviting members of the press to attend a public demonstration the following day. The announcement promised to address the accusations printed in the Chronicle and clarify the origin of the wireless transmission device currently under development. The invitation spread quickly through the newspapers. Journalists saw an opportunity to witness a historic scientific debate. Supporters of Edison believed the famous inventor would easily disprove the accusations. Others wondered whether the unknown inventor named Isaiah Turner truly possessed evidence strong enough to challenge one of the most powerful laboratories in America. Isaiah received the invitation as well. Daniel Harper delivered it personally to the boarding house where Isaiah was staying. "You realize what this means," Harper said quietly. Isaiah nodded. "They want to confront me publicly." Harper studied his face. "Are you ready for that?" Isaiah answered calmly. "Yes." The following morning, the laboratory courtyard filled with reporters, photographers, and curious spectators. Cameras stood ready to capture every moment, while journalists prepared notebooks for what many expected would become one of the most dramatic scientific confrontations of the decade. Thomas Edison stood near the entrance, surrounded by several engineers and investors. His calm posture suggested confidence, despite the controversy spreading through the city. A carriage arrived moments later. Isaiah stepped out and walked toward the gathered crowd. Murmurs moved through the spectators as people recognized the man whose name now appeared in newspapers across the country. Daniel Harper stood near the reporters holding a notebook, watching carefully as Isaiah approached the demonstration table, where the wireless transmission machine had been placed. Edison spoke first. "Mr. Turner," he said calmly, "you have accused this laboratory of claiming an invention that belongs to you." Isaiah nodded. "Yes." Edison gestured toward the machine. "This device represents months of research by my engineers," he said. "If you believe it was originally your idea, you may demonstrate your understanding of it here today." The challenge hung in the air as reporters leaned forward eagerly. Isaiah stepped toward the machine slowly. The copper coil stood tall beside the generator, while the small receiving bulb rested several feet away on a wooden stand. Engineers had attempted to reproduce the design using his stolen notebooks, yet they still could not make the system work correctly. Isaiah studied the arrangement for a moment before adjusting one of the metal plates near the base of the coil. He then turned the crank connected to the generator. A low humming sound filled the courtyard. Every person present watched the small bulb. For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly the bulb burst into bright, steady light without a single wire connecting it to the machine. Gasps moved through the crowd. Isaiah stepped back calmly while the bulb continued glowing. He turned toward the reporters and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "I believe that demonstration answers the question of who understands this invention." Silence followed his words. Thomas Edison looked at the glowing bulb, then at Isaiah Turner. And in that moment, the truth became impossible to deny. The wireless transmission machine belonged to the man who had just made it work. Within days, newspapers across the country carried the story of the forgotten inventor whose discovery challenged the most powerful laboratory in America. Investors quietly withdrew their claims, while Edison's laboratory released a statement acknowledging Isaiah Turner as the original creator of the wireless transmission concept. History had nearly erased him. But truth, once revealed, proved far more powerful than silence. And the name Isaiah Turner would eventually stand among the pioneers who helped shape the future of electrical technology. Yet the most important lesson of his story remains something deeper. Brilliance can come from anywhere, but sometimes it takes courage to make the world recognize it.